This message is brought to you by Alliance Bible Church located in Mequon, Wisconsin. Our vision is to captivate generations with the satisfying gospel of Jesus Christ. For more information about Alliance Bible Church or other resources, please check out our website, myabc.church.
You're saved by grace through faith. This is how the Lord rescues people. You're not saved, as we have heard, through your own moral performance. You don't put together a resume, hand it to God in hopes that one day He'll look at it and say, good, you're in. That's not what it means to be a Christian. What it means to be a Christian is to say, Jesus has compiled the resume that I need. Look to Him. Now, once you are accepted before the eyes of God, once you're brought into His family, where does He lead you? He leads you into the wilderness. Into the wilderness. The writer of Hebrews, chapter 3 and 4, uses the wilderness generation as a negative example of what it looks like to fall in the wilderness. They got out of Egypt, but they didn't get into the promised land because they fell through unbelief and disobedience. And so the writer of Hebrews is queuing us up and saying, now listen, we're going to make sure we're not like them. We're not going to be like them. And so we are diving into the wilderness generation. We're using that as our hermeneutical key, as our interpretive key to understanding what do these passages have to say to New Covenant Christians, to followers of Jesus Christ. We are students at Wilderness University, where we experience various trials that will test the genuineness of our faith. So one of the themes that this is bringing out is the necessary ingredient of perseverance. True Christians persevere. True Christians persevere. Now, the last scene in Exodus 15 ended with Israel encamped at an oasis with springs of fresh water and palm trees, a foretaste of this bountiful land that awaits them. But just like in real life, you can't stay on the beach forever. Eventually, you have to return to the wilderness. And we will return. So let me summarize chapter 16. So the Lord led Israel from that oasis, that Elim, into the wilderness of Sin. And once again, challenges arise. They run out of food, or so we're led to believe. The way in which the writer organizes the material leads me to believe they hadn't truly run out of food. They still got animals with them, but were rather bemoaning the less than stellar conditions they had to endure. It's as if they were stuck flying coach on a 14-hour international flight rather than having a first-class seat. And once again, their response is to grumble against their leaders. They bewail the fact that they had pots of meat in Egypt, and they flat out say it would be better to be back there than out here. All right, so we've got another round of grumbling going on. We've got another round of complaining. You relate to that, right? Parents, you can relate to that. So how will the Lord respond to this round of complaining? Well, Israel receives more patience. It's striking. They receive more patience. They receive more grace. They receive more mercy as the Lord provides food for them. Each morning, the Lord caused bread to appear on the ground, and they were instructed to go out before the heat of day to gather enough food for that day. If they gathered excess, it would rot by sunrise the next day, it'd be filled with maggots. This was an exercise in trusting the Lord, not for weekly bread, but daily bread. On the sixth day, they were told to gather enough for 2 days because there would be no bread and no gathering on the seventh day, the Sabbath. Now, what do you think happened? Well, they went out to gather bread anyway on the seventh day, on the Sabbath day. At which point the Lord asks a question. The question is this: how long will you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? That's the question. Now, this whole chapter is organized around Israel's three shortcomings. These three shortcomings protrude from distrust, ultimately, in the Lord. One daily challenge you face, one daily challenge I face, that all Christians face, and a question we will ask repeatedly is, can I trust the Lord with this? Can I trust the Lord with this? And so this story isolates 3 specific ways a distrust in the Lord during our wilderness excursion may manifest itself. They are jumping ship, anchoring our security to having excess, and denying the need for rest. 3 shortcomings that you and I will face, temptations we will face that protrude from a distrust in the Lord. Jumping ship, anchoring our security, having excess, and denying the need for rest. Let's look at these. First, jumping ship. When you realize the Christian life is lived in the wilderness, here's the bottom line. You're going to fight the temptation to go back to a different life, to an old life, or to exchange wilderness life as a follower of Christ for something else, which, by the way, if you're ever tempted, I can tell you right now, it's a greener grass conspiracy. Some of you turned a page spiritually just before or upon arriving at this church. But there's an old life in your past that you give a glance to occasionally. Your new life in Christ, just be clear, is not going to be all roses and perfume. You're going to be tempted to jump ship. Some of you have been in the wilderness for decades, but this temptation is not going to go away. The more suffering, the more adversity we face, the more intense the suffering, the more intense the adversity we face, inevitably will cause us to question at some point, should I get out of this? Persevering in the faith is not easy. Israel is finding that out. And how are they responding? They want to go back to their old life. They start belly aching over pots of meat and an all-you-can-eat breadstick buffet they allegedly enjoyed in Egypt. Now, we didn't really study what their life was like, but suffice it to say, it was miserable. Let me show you just one verse of it. In chapter 2, it says, during those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God. So they were an enslaved group of people living under the thumb of abusive masters. So why are they saying they want to go back to that? I think it's an important lesson about human nature. Remember, one of the things the Bible does is it holds up a mirror to us. You open it up, it holds up a mirror to you. It lets us know what we're like. Sometimes we don't intuitively know. It's an important lesson on human nature. I know this might sound shocking to you, but our memories are at times unreliable. When under duress, we tend to forget the bad stuff and remember the good stuff in inaccurate ways. You know, there's a repeated cliche that works out in life and in plot lines of stories. The one I remember the most was from a scene of Home Improvement back in the 90s. Some of you remember this. If you were not born, ask someone older than you about this. Tim Taylor and his wife Jill, you know, Tim the Toolman Taylor. Yeah. And their 3 boys were grown. I don't know if they were on the verge of leaving the house or whatever. They're getting older. And I think it was a friend of theirs that got married, and she had a baby. And they came over for dinner. And the baby was swaddled, asleep, peaceful, quiet, cute, adorable. You know how it goes. And it started creating stirrings. I don't remember which one. I don't know if it was Jill or it was Tim. Stirrings. And one of them said to the other, I think we should have another child. Well, and then the other one started bringing up the stories. Do you remember the 2 a.m. feedings? The diaper changes? Do you remember colic? Huh? Do you remember the time when our crawler got into the Clorox? Or in our case, it was the multivitamins. In emotionally charged moments, we tend to scrub the unpleasant stuff from our past. And we don't remember it so well. Israel's response of whitewashing their past is depicting for us something of human nature. We struggle to be content where we are. It's like the GPS coordinates of contentment are always somewhere we're not. And then when we get there, we find that it's moved. Well, it's not here anymore, it's over there. And so we're constantly chasing it, and we're trying to figure out why it is we're always saying, well, over there I could be happy. Over there I could be content. Back there I could be happy. Can you be content where you are? Can you be content where you are? Now, there's another reason they're unhappy with their wilderness condition. The text is subtle with it, but they're blaming Moses and Aaron for being where they are. Now, Moses is quick to correct that. No, you're not blaming me. You're blaming God in the end. And it's been true. Exodus 40 tells us it's the Lord who's led them from the moment they left Egypt. It's not Moses and Aaron. It's the Lord who leads you into the wilderness. And when we forget that, we can be quick to complain. But listen, Christian, life is lived in the wilderness. God led you there. And he knows what he's doing with your life. He really does. He's a master architect, a master designer, a master planner. He knows what he's doing with your life. There's a song written, ironically, back in the 90s that Stephen Curtis Chapman wrote called Burn the Ships. And this song captures very well what it is, this particular challenge of Israel's journey. He writes, in the spring of 1519, a Spanish fleet set sail. Cortez told his sailors this mission must not fail. On the eastern shore of Mexico, they landed with great dreams, but the hardships of the new world made them restless and weak. Quietly they whispered, let's sail back to the life we knew. But the one who led them there was saying, burn the ships. We're here to stay. There's no way we could go back now that we've come this far by faith. Burn the ships. We've passed the point of no return. Our life is here, so let the ships burn. Let them burn. In the spring of new beginnings, a searching heart set sail, looking for a new life and a love that would not fail. On the shores of grace and mercy, we landed with great joy, but an enemy was waiting to steal, kill, and destroy. Quietly he whispers, go back to the life you know. But the one who led us here is saying, burn the ships. We're here to stay. There's no way we could go back now that we've come this far by faith. Burn the ships. We've passed the point of no return. Our life is here, so let the ships burn. Let them burn. You're going to face, Christian, the temptation to go back to your old life, to jump ship. I say to you, burn the ships. We're here to stay. A second way our distrust of the Lord manifests itself is in anchoring our security to having excess. So the Lord hears their complaining, their grumbling, and once again meets the need. Now, this is the second time they've grumbled. If there's one thing we've learned about God, it's that he is very patient. He's rained down judgment on Israel's oppressors. He's parted the Red Sea. He's provided water for them. At what point is Israel going to learn the right response to hardship isn't grumbling, but faith-filled prayer? At what point will we learn the right response to hardship isn't grumbling, but faith-filled prayer to a heavenly Father who loves to provide our daily bread? The Lord is a far more patient Father than I am. They grumble again, and the Lord says, okay, I'll take care of your food problem. Each morning when you wake up, you'll see bread on the ground. Go collect enough bread for that day. On the sixth day, go collect enough for two. And the Lord tells them what's behind this. He says that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not. It's a test of their faith, a test of their trust. Nothing changes when you become a Christian. Wilderness University is a time of testing and training. Now, this particular test would have been very challenging for Israel. Israel was an agricultural people. If you're a farmer, you know that if you harvest only enough food in a day to meet the needs of that day, eventually you will have no food because no crops or animals produce food every day. Now they're being asked to restrain their natural tendency to gather as much as was available to gather in anticipation of the time when no gathering would be possible. God is teaching them to trust him every day afresh. And they were challenged to think about his provision in a way that had never been before part of their planning pattern. And so God worked a very simple and effective system for his people. New bread was available for gathering every morning. Old manna was gotten rid of by the heat of the sun. So lazy people were thus disciplined into getting up early enough to get their food for the day. And competitive types were unable to gain any advantage over others by gathering and keeping disproportionate amounts. Laziness, greed, equal but opposite problems. How did they fare? Not well, I'm afraid. They didn't listen to Moses. Some tried saving bread for the next day, but when they woke up, it was crawling with maggots. They didn't think there would be food for them the next day. They didn't trust the Lord would provide their daily bread. So they create a workaround. I'll gather a little excess today, save it so I have food for tomorrow. Just in case he doesn't show up. Just in case he doesn't make good on what he said he would do. Good luck to you if you're trying to create a workaround around God. It's just not going to happen. God thwarted their plan. It's a very interesting lesson for us here. God will not allow you to manipulate the circumstances of your life that will enable you to bypass learning to trust him. We like to think we're in control. That's an illusion. God will not allow you to manipulate the circumstances of your life in such a way that will enable you to bypass learning to trust him. Now, how does God do that? He does that by rotting your excess. By rotting whatever it is you have propped up as your security. Sometimes God does that through job loss or unexpected financial hardship. Wealth is fleeting. He has a way of rotting our excess. God's not going to allow you to manipulate the circumstances of your life that will enable you to bypass learning to trust him. In Luke 12, Jesus talks about another way the Lord rots our excess. He tells a story about a wealthy man whose land produced bountifully. And he had so much stuff that he ran out of storage for it all, so he decided to build bigger barns, bigger storage. Once full, he would take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, "You fool, this night your soul is required of you." Death does not spare the one who has accumulated much. It's no discriminator of persons. Disease, cancer, illness, bodily breakdown comes for the poor and the wealthy. Sometimes God rots our excess by showing us how unsatisfying those securities are. He doesn't physically or materially rot the excess. He does so kind of spiritually, psychologically, emotionally. Such was the case with Zacchaeus. Talk about a guy who had it all. His financial portfolio was engorged. But somehow that wasn't enough. So when Jesus comes to town, he climbs a tree just to be able to get a look at him. So think about that. How discontent with wealth does he have to be for a man of his glorified stature to engage in a child's activity of tree climbing? Try to get this down to Main Street here. If somehow Cedarburg was throwing a ticker tape parade for Jesus and they were stacked 8 deep, Elon Musk shows up. He can't see, so he climbs a tree to be able to get a look at him. What is that saying? Something's wrong with this guy's securities. The foundation is cracking. God will not allow you to manipulate the circumstances of your life that will enable you to bypass learning to trust him. This is one of the great mercies of God. He is going to force us to trust him for our daily bread and not lean on our excess for security. A third way our distrust of the Lord manifests itself is in denying the need for rest. Denying the need for rest. So on the 6th day, they were to gather twice as much because there would be no provision of food on the Sabbath, because there would be no work on the Sabbath. And when they woke up on the Sabbath, they discovered things were exactly as God said they would be. The food, the extra food they had gathered on the 6th day was not rotten like it would have been every other day. And there was no food on the ground. Still, some went out to gather food on the Sabbath. Why? Well, the text isn't specific about it. Did they not gather twice what they should have on Saturday? Or did they're just going out to see if they could get some more that day? Nonetheless, they went out to look, found nothing. And this is interesting because this is the first time Sabbath is mentioned in the Bible. As the scriptures unfold, like so many other concepts, Sabbath is shown to be a pregnant concept. Sabbath means rest. And so what is this teaching the believer, the Christian? There are a number of things. One, the Lord is conveying to us our need for physical rest. Christian life is lived in the wilderness, right? When we exit Egypt, we don't immediately enter the promised land. The Lord leads us into this wilderness for a time of testing and training to prove the genuineness of our faith. In order to thrive in the wilderness, you're going to need physical rest. You can't burn the candle at both ends and expect to flourish. I love Psalm 127, verse 2. It says, "It is in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for he gives to his beloved sleep." Did you know that sleeping is a gift that God gives as an expression of his love for you? You have to be careful with your teenagers on that one. You could warn them, but bread disappear. It did burn up by the heat of the day as the day went on. But there's more to Sabbath than physical rest. A little later in the story, at God's direction, the Sabbath becomes a sacred memorial to the work of salvation he performed for Israel in freeing them from Egyptian tyranny. As the scriptures unfold, there is continuity between the Sabbath and the Lord's Day. So this gathering today, where you are, is the Lord's Day. And when we gather, it is a sacred memorial to the work of God in saving us from sin and seating us in the heavenly realms. So for me, this is why, pastor or not, this gathering is at the top of my priorities for my weekly schedule. It's not just going to church. It's participating in a sacred memorial and tapping into something God says I need if I'm going to thrive in the wilderness. One grave error that professing believers are prone to make is downplaying the importance of this gathering. This is a denial of our need for rest. It's going to lead to failure in the wilderness, not flourishing. It's fascinating that it's the writer of Hebrews who's the one who says, "Let us not give up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing." It's the writer of Hebrews who is drawing our attention to the wilderness generation as a way of warning us not to be like them. It is the wilderness generation that went out on the Sabbath to gather food. So we can deny our need for rest physically. We can deny our need for rest ecclesiastically in our relationship to our church, this gathering. We can also deny our need for rest relationally with the Lord. I mean, in the immediate context of this story of gathering bread, what is God trying to teach them by having them rest on the Sabbath? He's trying to teach them that he will provide for them and sustain them. It's very simple. You don't have to work on the Sabbath. God says you don't have to fill your life with 7 days of work and 0 days of rest. Trust me to provide for you. I'm going to take care of your needs in the wilderness. And so the Sabbath has all these implications that come across in one form or another to the new covenant believer. But there's one more aspect to Sabbath I want you to see. The Sabbath that God gave Israel remains unparalleled in the ancient Near East in any culture or nation. Unparalleled. This is mightily significant. God is saying to them, listen, if you choose to follow me, if you choose to trust me, you will have a Sabbath rest. No other God is going to offer you that. No other religion will offer you that. I'm the only one who can give you rest. And this rest that God is giving them isn't something they work for. God provides twice the amount of bread for them on the sixth day. In fact, the author bends over backwards to get us to see, I gave you bread, I gave you Sabbath. gave. God gave bread. God gave Sabbath. God gives the bread that provides for rest. God gives the bread that provides for rest. Now, did you know that this story in Exodus 16 is something Jesus referred to? He talks about it in John 6. He says, our fathers ate the manna in the wilderness, that's the bread. As is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. Jesus then said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. They said to him, Sir, give us this bread always. Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger. Whoever believes in me shall never thirst. God gives the bread that provides for rest. So who, class, is the true and better bread? It is Jesus. And what does Jesus, the true and better bread, provide? Sabbath, rest. You know, there is so much packed into the Bible's notion of rest, but think about this. What did bread mean for Israel in the wilderness? Survival, nourishment, energy, health, flourishing, life. Christian, Jesus is your daily bread in the wilderness. Jesus is your daily bread in the wilderness. He is your survival, your nourishment, your energy, your health, your flourishing, your rest, and your life in the wilderness. Now, when I say that Jesus is your survival, when I say that he's all this, he's your nourishment, he's your flourishing, he's your rest, he's your life, some of you are puzzled by that when you hear it. You don't know exactly how that works. I can understand that, but let's work with the bread and eating food metaphor to see if there's something for us there. I don't know how the process of digestion works in detail. I don't know how all the vitamins and minerals are harvested from the food we ingest. I don't know how those nutrients end up nourishing my heart, bones, muscles, and brain function. But you know what? I actually don't have to know that in order to know that food satisfies physical hunger. You don't have to be able to explain that in order to know that when you do eat food, it somehow nourishes you. In the same way, I don't have to know all the ins and outs of how Jesus, the true bread, provides survival, nourishment, energy, health, flourishing, rest, and life in the wilderness in order to know that he satisfies spiritual hunger. I don't have to be able to explain that in order to experience that. Because I can't explain the ins and outs and the minutiae of how that works. But I do know that just as food satisfies physical hunger, Jesus satisfies spiritual hunger. But here's the problem. The problem is he becomes our monthly bread or our weekly bread or no bread at all, not our daily bread. That's the problem. Now, at warp speed, let me drill this down to street level by talking about Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift was quite the romantic when she burst on the scene in 2006. She sang about the ecstasies of young love and the heartbreak of it. But her mood has hardened as her star has risen. In her album Midnights, it plays upon a string of negative emotions, anxiety, restlessness, exhaustion, and occasional anger. Where's that coming from? Has she found the bread of life in the wilderness? Well, as it turns out, Swift is part of a larger trend. Researchers analyzed more than 150,000 pop songs released between 1965 and 2015. Over that time, the appearance of the word love in the top 100 hits was cut in half. Meanwhile, the number of times such songs contained negative emotion words like hate rose sharply. Pop music isn't the only thing that has gotten a lot harsher. Other researchers analyzed 23 million news headlines published between the year 2000 and 2019 in the United States. The headlines, too, grew significantly more negative, with a greater proportion of headlines denoting anger, fear, disgust, and sadness. So, if misery levels keep rising, what can we expect in the future? According to the Global Peace Index, civic discontent, riots, strikes, anti-government demonstrations increased by 244% from 2011 to 2019. Here's the bottom line. The emotional health of the world is shattering. The emotional health of the world is shattering. And from where I sit, it is easy to know what it needs. The true daily bread of life who offers rest in the wilderness, Jesus Christ. And just in case we might be tempted to think that's a problem out there and not in me, Christian, unless Jesus is your daily bread, your emotional health is going to shatter as well. You cannot occupy the world that we live in and think you'll be just fine if Jesus is not your daily bread. He has to be your daily bread of life in the wilderness. I'll close with this. I once heard a parable in which a child asked his teacher why God didn't provide Israel with enough bread for an entire year all at once. Frankly, it was a question I was asking. Hey, why not give me a week? How about a month? I could see myself negotiating with God. So this pupil asked the teacher, why didn't God provide bread for a whole year all at once? And this is what the teacher said. Once there was a king who had a son to whom he gave a yearly allowance, paying him the entire sum on the fixed date. It soon happened that the day on which the allowance was due was the only day of the year when the father ever saw his son. So the king changed his plan and gave his son day by day that which was sufficient for the day. And then the son visited his father every morning. See, there's a reason God arranged for bread to be provided daily. There's a reason God put this story in the Bible to foreshadow John 6. Jesus is your daily bread of life in the wilderness. Let's pray. Lord, I know that wilderness life can get harsh and get very challenging. So much so that we think that there's a better life somewhere else. Lord, I pray that you would remind us it is better to be with you in the wilderness than in Egypt without you. I pray, Lord, that you would remind us that our natures often set up these greener grass conspiracies. When things get hard, we automatically assume someplace else is a place that we could be content. But rather than running someplace else for that, Lord, I pray that you would teach us to ask for daily bread. And you do that not just with material provision, God, but you do that ultimately in providing us with a deep existential settledness, a sense of rest within us through the person and work of Jesus. And so, Lord, I pray that we would be quick to run to him. We have been wired, we have been created, we've been formed, we've been fashioned in such a way that we need the daily bread of life. It's not weekly, it's not monthly, it's not when we feel like it, it's daily. So Lord, I pray that you'd teach us to run to him. And as we do, God, I pray that you would show us why you've asked us to do that. That we may know what it is to be content in him. And we ask these things to the glory of his name. Amen.